I hate playing something and already starting to think about the passage that comes next or what could go wrong, or that's just something that I don't like. So if I stay focused on the music that I'm playing right now and on what sound do I want here and how do I create those colors, that keeps my mind in a good place.
Welcome to the Bulletproof Musician Podcast, where you'll learn how to practice more effectively and perform better under pressure with insights from expert musicians and the latest research in performance psychology.
So I have to confess that in all the years I've been around music, I think you might be only the second blind musician that I've met personally. Do you have a sense of how many blind musicians or blind folks who are involved in music are out there?
I really don't. I'm actually doing a project now that's sort of about that. But part of that project is to try to find them. But I don't know of so many. There was a Japanese pianist quite a few years ago who won the Scriabin competition. But yeah, I don't know so many.
This project that you're referencing, Blind Notes, the podcast, I believe, is what initially made me reach out to you again. And one of the things that you mentioned as being a goal of the podcast to explore how it is that blind musicians learn, memorize, and interpret music was the thing that I was really intrigued by. Because, when you and I knew each other previously, I don't know that we ever had a conversation about how it is that you approach learning music. And so that's really what I wanted to explore with you today and just find out what are the similarities, what are the differences, what are the particular challenges and systems or approaches or strategies that you use to all three of those things, to learn the notes, to memorize the music, and to interpret the music. And so I don't know where you would want to start with that, but yeah, where should we begin?
I was curious about this whole topic just because I know how I do things. And I also know that as I travel around and I play concerts in places, it happens to me quite often that random people will come to me, oh, I have a blind student or I'm going to have a blind student soon or where they just have questions about this. Particularly teachers, they want their students to do well, and they want to know, how can I or what do I need to do to teach this person who is blind? And I always felt, and I don't think I'm wrong about that. I think most of my teachers, if not all, really, didn't really have to do anything super special to teach me. Of course, with the exception of dealing with Braille music when I was little. My first piano teacher actually learned Braille music. And she can read it. She can also write Braille music. So that, of course, was a very special case. I was young and I needed to learn how to read music. So she just kind of took it upon herself to learn and teach me. But other than that, later on when I was older, I thought, there weren't that many differences. Certainly once I already knew the piece that I was playing. But that's why I always thought, okay, this must really be a thing because people think about it so much. So I want to know how other people felt as they were learning and how other people go about what a musician usually does. So that's why I became interested in the topic, and I'm now going to learn about it as I produce this podcast and I interview different people. I'm hoping I will learn a lot myself because, again, I don't know many blind musicians, and so I only know what I do.
I imagine there must be individual differences like there are with anything else when we learn music. I did watch that video that you put out on how Braille music works, but I wonder, in case folks don't watch that, I wonder if you could explain a little bit how Braille music does work and how it is that you approach learning the notes through that method.
So Braille music is a completely linear way of writing music. So you really don't have any vertical view, so to speak, of the score. Essentially, you have different symbols that represent different things, and you just see them one after the other, and then, you try to memorize the music. There are some very challenging parts about this whole thing. For example, if you're learning, let's say a fugue, something where you have many different voices, and part of looking at a regular score is that you can see how those voices fit with each other and where you have different notes that actually play together, etc. In Braille, you don't see that. So you really have to see each voice individually, learn them, and then put it together in your head. So yeah, it's completely linear. You see something, okay, so you see an octave sign that tells you where that note is, what register. You see the actual note, then depending on the value of the note, the length of the note, you have some dots under it or you don't. You see, I don't know, anything, fingerings, dynamics. Before the note, you have all kinds of things that can happen, whether the note is a sharp or a flat, or so it's all explained to you sort of one thing at a time.
When you go through the Braille music, does this mean then that you are hearing the notes as you're reading them? Or like, how does the process of seeing the kind of information about the note and then the audiation part come together for you?
Well, when I read it, I guess I hear it in my head just the same way that you would when you look at a score. I think the main difference is that, well, okay, so I can read with one hand and play with the other. That's one thing that I can do. Personally, I'm used to reading Braille with my right hand. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's a lot easier to read with the right hand and play the left than to read with the left and play the right. I can do both. But usually what ends up happening is I read, and then I memorize a small chunk of music. Usually, for example, a piano score is always done by small 2-3 bars at a time. So you see the right hand, 3 bars of the right hand. Left hand, 3 bars of the left hand. Right hand, 3 bars of the right hand. So usually I will learn it by these groups of 3 bars, 2 bars, whatever it is. It's not even necessarily always the same. Sometimes it's 3 bars, sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 4, sometimes it's even just 1 bar, because it depends on how long or how much space that chunk of music takes. Usually in a Braille score, you will have what in Braille looks like 2 or 3 lines of one hand at a time, but you won't have like half a page of the left hand and then half a page of the right, for example. It's always small chunks.
How does it work with like hands separate or hands together then? I mean, is that something that's a function of how many notes you're trying to learn, or how does that work?
For me, with a Braille score, the process is really, I'll usually take, let's say I start with the right hand, although depending on the piece, I might just want to learn the left hand first, I don't know. But I take right hand, I learned whatever small passage that's there, so let's say 3 bars of it. I'll play it until I know it, which usually doesn't take a very long time when it's just one hand. And then I learn the other hand, and then I put them together. Now, if it's a piece that I know well, putting the 2 hands together is not difficult at all, because I know the piece, I know how they go, and I once I've learned the actual notes from the score, I put the 2 hands together, and then it's just a matter of sort of playing the passage enough times that it stays both in my head and in my body, so to speak. And I do it like that, small chunks at a time. The problem, I would say, comes when, again, with parts where you have a lot of writing that looks like counterpoint, where you have notes that are held or different voices, or then Braille becomes really sort of convoluted, the way that it's that you write these things out in Braille. It's a little bit hard to explain. I don't think I should get into it because we will never finish, but it is very slow to learn when the texture becomes complicated. For example, I remember, I think it was, last year, I was learning a Scriabin sonata, and I was looking at the Braille score. And if you think of the way Scriabin writes for the piano, where you have all kinds of notes that are held at different times, you have little voices that go between the 2 hands, you have all of this writing in Braille. You need time just to understand what it is that's written there. And then you put it together in your head and then you play it. So it's slow, but it's really meant to be memorized. The good thing about it is that when you're done, you're done. So if I take, a complicated passage, I might take quite a long time to sort of read through all the Braille, understand what it is, learn both hands, put them together, and make sure that I'm actually playing everything the way it's supposed to be. But then once I have it, I'm done. Whereas a lot of people, sighted musicians who are working with a regular score, they'll they'll spend a lot of time playing through and sort of sight reading through things. And then, at least for many people, there's a moment when they say, okay, now I'm going to try to memorize this or play this by memory. And then that takes them time as well. At least in my case, it's slow, but when I'm done with it. For the most part, I can sort of forget about the Braille score, at least for that passage, and then I can just move on.
That kind of brings up a couple questions, actually. One, I'm curious, what role and this is even for sighted musicians, there are differing opinions on, how much listening to recordings to do and when to do that and when not to do that and so forth. Where does listening to music fit in for you? I mean, do you do much of that at all at any stage of learning, or how's that work?
Okay, I definitely like to listen to recordings of what I'm learning. What I definitely don't do is to listen with the score, because you simply cannot read that quickly with Braille. Again, you're always reading, in the case of a piano score, you're always reading one hand at a time. Let's say I can read at the speed of the recording, which you really can't, but even if you could, it's quite difficult to just follow the right hand, because you have parts of the left hand in the middle. So you have again part of the right, part of the left, part of the right, part of the left. So it's really not meant to be used in real time.
For me, being a violinist, I'm only playing one note at a time, and score study looks different for me than it might for my pianist my wife, is a pianist. And for her, it was always a matter of looking at the score first, kind of learning the piece in a way, and then starting to play it. But for me, it was always like I had it in my mind first and I could hear it, and then I would sort of go to the music and learn it from there. What does score study mean for you or look for you? Like, how do you approach that?
There are many things that, when you look at a regular score, are very quick to see. So you have a crescendo that starts somewhere and, I don't know, it arrives to a forte 2 bars later. That's just a silly example. It doesn't matter. But all of these things, when you look at a score, you kind of see them immediately, and you have an idea, I guess, in your head of what the phrase is going to sound like or what it's going to look like. Whereas in Braille, that's something that you have to discover slowly, because the process of reading from the beginning to the end of the phrase is much slower, and you really don't have that sort of visual. I don't know. I mean, you tell me, but I'm sure when you see, I don't know, a melodic line visually on a score, just the visuals of it tell you something about its shape, right? Mm-hmm. That doesn't exist at all in Braille. So first you read, and then you arrive to that kind of mental picture of what it is that you're playing, the direction of it, if you will. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So that's why, for me, I often use a mixture of Braille and audio for learning music. So my old piano teacher from when I was little still today makes these, very sort of simple recordings, simple in a way that she doesn't really have to practice the piece or anything, because she just plays hands separately and just very slow, so that I can hear the notes. And that sometimes is a lot quicker than just reading through the Braille. For the most part, what I'm interested in when I look at the Braille score is any markings that are there that are not the notes, because those are harder to transmit or to communicate through audio. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. Things like the articulations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Any articulations, any dynamics that are there, anything that the composer left there for you to to work with, or sometimes it's the composer, sometimes it's just the addition, whatever it is. But all of those things, those are the things that I'm interested in, unless it's just very, very complicated textures where, for example, I don't know, I remember not too long ago I was studying the Beethoven Opus 110, where you have a fugue at the end, right? And that is hard to record, because a lot of times each hand individually doesn't really mean much, because it's just chunks of the different voices that keep moving up and down. So in those cases, yes, as difficult as it is, it's better to just use the Braille and take the time required to actually read all of those different voices and put them together in your head it's like a puzzle, really. Like some kind of puzzle game where you put together the notes. It's slow, but that's probably better than using sound. But for other things, like things where, you have clearly a left and a right hand that are doing different things, in terms of learning the notes, audio is faster. And then I will use the Braille score to look at other things.
Along those lines, actually, I remember Leon Fleischer once talking about how when you listen to recordings, oftentimes what you hear is not necessarily what's in the score, but you hear the influences of previous generations of pianists having established certain traditions in the music, which then get potentially kind of distorted over time from one generation to the next. And are there times where you look at the Braille score and you find things that are surprising to you that you didn't hear, or actually things that weren't in the score that you heard in the recordings, or vice versa?
Definitely. And again, that's why I need to keep going back to it. And I think even if we don't think about recordings, I think when you've been playing a piece for long enough, you start distorting things yourself. And for me, that's probably one of my biggest sort of struggles as a pianist. When I've been playing something for several years, for me, going back to the score is not quick or easy. It's annoying. Mm-hmm. It's very slow. Like, just think that, I don't know, if you think of a regular score, a piece that takes 20 or 30 pages, in Braille is a huge book. It could easily go over 100 pages. So just finding a specific passage can be very complicated. And now, of course, mostly when I use Braille scores, I'm using digital Braille scores with a Braille display. And with a Braille display, it's a little bit easier because at least you're not turning pages like crazy, but it's still very hard to find specific passages. Mm-hmm. So let's say if I just want to take a look at a given passage because I feel like I've been sort of doing things that may not necessarily be in the score, or I'm exaggerating too much, or I just don't remember exactly what's written, it takes a long time. So for me, that's really the biggest problem that I have when I have to go back to the score to look at something. It's so slow, but I have two ways of doing it. I either do it that way, or I ask somebody like, can you quickly look at the score and tell me, is there really a crescendo here, or did I just make it up?
So it sounds like the memorization process then, even if it's slower, it seems like it's a key part of making sure you're not, like you said, distorting things too much from what's originally there.
Of course, it's very important. But again, I think when you've recently learned something, there's a point where, for me at least, where I really feel like I have almost like the actual score in my head. I have the notes in my head. I'm aware of the different articulations that are there. But then, of course, as time goes by, those things start becoming less and less clear in your head. And there's a point where muscle memory and, of course, also my head, but I'm perfectly able to play the piece, but maybe the score itself is not so clear in my mind anymore.
Is there something that you do to try to keep not just the score, but notes and music in your head for longer?
Not really. I think when I'm bringing a piece back after not playing it for some time, just by listening to recordings of it, whether it's just commercial recordings or these recordings that my old teacher still does for me, it comes back rather quickly. It's just that, there's always some amount of work that you need to do to make sure that it's really back, as you probably know better than me. You bring it back and it seems like it does come back and it's in your fingers, but then when you actually get ready to actually play the piece somewhere, you realize that your head is not really following you, and that, of course, is very dangerous.
I wonder if you could say more about that, actually, because I'm curious about what the the actual moment-to-moment, day-to-day experience of practicing looks like for you, developing that sort of security that you can trust under pressure on stage, and what you said just now about, your mind kind of not necessarily being in the right place as you're playing.
Right. So for me, I'm not talking about a piece that I just learned, because again, that's a different situation, because everything's very fresh in your mind. And in that case, I think it's difficult for your mind to not really being in the right place because, well, you just learned it. So in a sense, for me, playing something that I learned recently is easier. It's stressful in its own way, but from a mental standpoint, that horrible feeling we all have when we go on stage where, okay, am I going to get lost or do I really know? When I just learned something, I do feel quite confident. I know what's going on. Whereas when it's something that I've played for years, I do a lot of work of just playing. I don't know how to find the right words. For me, it's like very sort of deliberate playing, but not necessarily in tempo, but not necessarily slow either. It's just letting your body play however it feels comfortable at the moment, and in a way that you really feel like you're allowing your mind to really follow everything you're doing. Also, I will spend a lot of time repeating passages or even just entire phrases so that I find a reason to do what I'm doing. I find musical sense to everything that I'm playing. And that's really what helps me, at least, to stay focused and to have, to make sure that my mind is really following my body and my fingers. And I'm not just playing out of sort of automatic movements. It's like, I don't really know how to explain it. I sit and I play. I just let my body play without really trying to play too fast or too slow. And whenever I feel like I need it, I will repeat and repeat a phrase until I feel like there's some kind of connection happening between what my hands are doing and what my mind is thinking.
And in terms of what your mind is thinking, could you elaborate on that a little bit?
A few years ago, I wouldn't really have said this. I think more and more what my mind is thinking is about what kind of expression you're looking for in whatever passage you're playing. Because I think there are two reasons for it. One, just thinking of music and of each passage you play in terms of the expression and the sound that you're looking for also means that I am not thinking about what's coming next, which for me is not a good idea. I hate playing something and already starting to think about the passage that comes next or what could go wrong, or that's just something that I don't like. So if I stay focused on the music that I'm playing right now and on what sound do I want here and how do I create those colors, that keeps my mind in a good place. And then there's the fact that I think that generally speaking, as musicians, that's probably what we should be doing anyways.
Right. So if we could go back in a time machine and I could ask Ignasi from like 5 or 10 years ago that question, what would you have said back then?
Back then, I think I was a lot more interested in almost having the score in my head as I played. So, I would do a lot more, which, I still do those things and I think they're useful. I just don't approach performance in that way. But I would do a lot more of trying to start playing in random parts of the piece to make sure I know exactly what's going on in that part and my hands know exactly where to go, even if it's in the middle of a difficult passage or just sort of trying to really have a complete mental map of the score, mental and physical map of what's going on. It's not that I don't think that's important now, because I still do the same things, but when I'm actually performing, I don't think in those terms anymore, because I think it's just not helpful for me.
Could this be perhaps just sort of a natural stage of growth or evolution in terms of you're developing more confidence and trust in yourself? Or, I mean, is this something that you could have accelerated getting to?
I'm not sure. I think a big part of it, to be honest, has to do with having been working so much and playing with Maria João Pires for so many years. I think she changed a lot of, how I think about about music. And I'm not saying that that's the only reason, for sure, but I think that definitely helped. I think she helped me in many ways to care less about the very obvious dangers of being on stage, right? I mean, you can make mistakes, you can just mess up, you can, I mean, you name it. And I think once you realize that those things are just part of life, if they happen, they happen. And once I started to accept that whether I like it or not, I am not necessarily a crazy perfectionist, as in, I don't enjoy practicing just to make sure I play clean. So once I kind of let go of those things, I think automatically my mind goes somewhere else. And that doesn't mean that I don't play clean or that I don't practice my stuff to make sure I can play like a competent person. But it's just the idea that when I'm actually on stage playing, I try to not think about that, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really do anything for me.
It sounds like it's freed you up a little bit, and it's a more liberating headspace to be in, perhaps, when you're
right. And of course, you're not always there. It's quite random. I remember about a month and a half or two ago, one specific concert in the Netherlands out of several, and it was just that one. I went out and I just, I don't know, I just couldn't. I just felt, I mean, I did play and it was all right, I guess. But the feeling as I was playing was just not good. And when I feel that way, I actually start thinking of what I'm playing in terms of hand positions, in terms of what's coming next, in terms of, okay, so now we are back in the recapitulation, so things are a little bit different here because he did this instead of that. And when I start doing that, it's not enjoyable for me.
It sounds like that's where you're more just navigating your mental map of the score as opposed to actually
exactly
trying to bring any of it to life.
And doing that while I play is not helpful. But I think it is helpful for other people. I'm sure. I don't know. Just for me, it only brings up scary ideas.
Right. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the sorts of things that you learned from Pires in terms of this freedom and being able to let go of some of the perfectionistic tendencies that I think we all have to some degree?
What I learned most is how to use my body to get what I want instead of really looking for it. A lot of the times, I think with her, I realized that within common sense and within the idea that you are playing in the right style and that you understand the composer you're playing. But I think I have now sort of I'm letting my body decide a little bit how phrases are shaped and how I actually just how I play in general. I think the most important thing that I learned from her is she calls it, I don't know if that's the right way of saying it, but she always says just let your body play randomly. And what I mean by randomly is when I feel free playing and when I feel okay playing the piano, there's a big part of it where within the big picture of what you're doing and the big picture of how you want to shape a specific passage, I really try to not let notes sound the same. Moving my arms, moving my body so that everything is a little bit more alive and timing is not ever really perfect. And I think for me that was a huge amount of work. When I finished studying at Juilliard and I came back to Europe, and at that time I remember asking my agent at the time, who was also working with Maria, that I wanted to meet with her because I knew her from when I was little, but I'm a disaster and I had lost contact completely. I met her again, and of course you're just trying to play well, and you're just trying to find systems. And when you find systems in everything, whether it's in how something is written or different patterns, or when you have a pattern that repeats several times going down or going up, it's easy to fall into systems that are very comfortable, and you just repeat that many times, generally in ways that sound quite similar, just trying to make it sound quote unquote musical. And those systems, I realized, were making things very stiff for me. And this idea that she really pushed on me, which was just let random things happen and let your body do things whatever way they come out at that time, helps. Those things really help to break systems. And once you break systems in music, then music is able to, I guess, exist and breathe. And for me, that was a huge learning process.
Was there some sort of like internal resistance to that? I mean, even if intellectually, like you were totally on board with it, was it difficult for you to get to that point of being able to trust that?
I'm still learning. I don't think it's so much, as I said earlier, I think anything that's a system in life, any known process, any kind of system, brings you a feeling of security. And I think particularly when we are younger, there's nothing we want more than security when we play. So yeah, it's scary, but in a way, once I feel like I'm comfortable with a piece and I'm able to play in that way, it really feels like what you're playing has a lot more purpose, and I'm a lot more, I'm a lot more free to react to what I hear in the moment without worrying so much about going in and out of that pattern, or now I enter this passage and I know I have to do this or that there.
I think it absolutely makes sense. And it's actually very much aligned with the way in which our understanding of motor learning is seemingly going nowadays. It used to be, I think, that we naturally, intuitively thought that there was just one exact correct way to perform a skill, and that the goal was to learn that and then to replicate that, consistently. But motor learning folks are finding that that's not necessarily the case. That great performers, when you look at how they play differently. They don't do the one exact thing that we're often taught is like the correct way to perform a skill. And I mean, even if you think about writing your own signature, it's impossible to write your signature exactly the same twice in a row. And there's actually quite a bit of variation from one repetition to the next, even at the highest levels. And so I think embracing that and being comfortable with that, and still, like you said, playing at the highest level and doing what it is that you want, seems to be the way in which we're understanding motor learning these days.
I think it's because, so when we're young, for the most part, we are taught quote-unquote technique, because for one thing, particularly when you're younger, there are times when, your teacher or just yourself, you think, okay, I'm doing this to practice my technique. And so what we understand as technique is this idea of something that I guess over the years we have concluded that those things, or piano technique as we understand it, this is how it's comfortable for most people. And this is how it's supposed to be more comfortable for the hand. The problem, at least the way I understand it, the problem is that many times, really quite often for me at least, the correct way of doing something, or what I would have been taught is the correct way of doing something, is not necessarily what helps the sound that I'm trying to create. And I think once you start thinking of fingerings and of just the movements you do in terms of how it helps or doesn't help the sound that you want, or the shape that you're trying to give to a specific phrase, then it makes a lot more sense. It just feels a lot more organic. And at least for me, I realized that quite often what ends up working is not what is supposed to work. I think that took me a while to accept.
I wonder if this is related to something that I read in an interview that you did. So I'm going to, if it's okay, kind of quote you back to yourself, and then maybe you can connect the two or elaborate on it a little bit. So at one point you said something to the effect of, it's one thing to sit at the piano and play the notes, and another thing to practice in a way that's useful and where you're actually making progress. For me, if I practice more than 5 or 6 hours a day, I'm just wasting my time. And if I keep going, I'll create bad habits. That took some time for me to understand. I'm curious, this last statement, that took some time for me to understand, makes me think that there was a time where you did put a lot more, maybe not effective or efficient time into just sitting at the keyboard and doing things over and over. And are those two things related that you're describing? Or I wonder if you can just
Definitely.
say more about where you are now with that.
I think so. There are two things here. One is that particularly from the moment I moved to the US when I was, 18 years old or whatever, I saw that everybody around me was practicing so much. And as silly as it is, when you see that everybody around you is practicing like crazy, and you see that there are people who are able to go into a practice room at 9 a.m. with their lunch already all there and everything, and they're able to practice there, until 1, and then they'll eat in that same practice room and go wash their hands and continue until 7. When you see that, you start thinking, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. And I think especially when you're younger, it's quite easy to feel sort of influenced by these things. And when I'm saying this, it's not that I think that other people shouldn't do it. I just think that you need to figure out what works for you. And I don't think I was necessarily good at that. I think I just tried to do what seemed right. The problem was that, I was never able to do the 9 a.m. Lunch and then keep practicing thing. That just never happened. But I did try to force myself to practice as much as I could. And it's definitely true that at some point, I just didn't have any purpose in what I was doing, other than the fact that I knew I was supposed to keep going, and I probably didn't have enough patience either. Like something for me, and again, that's just me. Hopefully there are people who are more efficient than me and have better ways. But for me, a specific passage that's difficult needs some amount of time, and I need my body to get used to it, and I need my body to tell me how it thinks that I should approach it. And that's not something that I can do by repeating it too many times the same day, or finding methods with, playing it with a metronome very slowly and then increasing the tempo. And those things don't work very well for me. I need more time, and I just sort of need to find it. And there's a point where I had to accept that fact and just live with it. I don't like to practice for a very long time. And if I do it, for the most part, I'm not really doing anything good for myself. A good example of this is actually just last month. It was the end of March. I came back from a long tour, and I had a program it was a completely different program, and I had the Schubert D959 sonata in the second half, which is very long. And of course, I had the piece sort of ready, but not really. And I had a lot of work to do. And I came back, and for different reasons during the tour, I didn't have any time to practice. And I had anticipated that I would have a lot of time, but because I had 3 days in between, but I just didn't at all. So I came back in an emergency mode, thinking, okay, I really need to make this happen. And the only thing that I accomplished by practicing too much, so many hours, really nonstop, and going back to sort of the school way of practicing, is that I actually ended up having to cancel the first concert and move it, because I managed to sort of, I was in pain, my right hand wasn't feeling right, and I thought, I don't want to play with this, I'm just going to take 10 days off, and thankfully we were able to find solutions, and it was all good. But that's actually, it kind of proves what I'm saying, at least to myself.
Maybe this is a little bit too detailed, but let's say that you had this Schubert that you needed to play, and you knew that there were a number of areas that needed some work. What does the process of actually doing that work look like? Like, what does the process of problem solving or working out some of those details look like for you?
So in an ideal scenario, really comes down to this same kind of way of playing that I was talking about earlier, where I will try to just let myself play whatever at that moment feels comfortable. And of course, whenever I don't know the piece very well, what feels comfortable is going to turn out to be quite slow. And there's a point where what feels comfortable will start sounding like what that piece is supposed to sound like. And that is a process that for me is difficult to explain because I don't really have a method to it. I mean, there are small things like, when you look at it at the micro level, there are definitely things that are very obvious. I don't know if I have a big jump and I'm not consistently getting it, then I'll just practice that jump the way you would expect, right? I mean, just doing it, maybe hands separately, or just making sure that I get my hand to the right place, but without playing the note and only playing the note when the hand is already set, and then trying to speed up that process. When you look at it at sort of that sort of small level, then it's everything you would expect from a person practicing piano. But those are specific passages. Other than that, it's just kind of playing through different passages in different ways, trying to understand how I want each phrase to feel like in my body and my arms, and little by little, that all comes together to something that sounds like a normal performance. And the ideal scenario is where that situation where I'm just playing what feels comfortable to my body is the performance. And again, because there's no specific method to it, I couldn't tell you exactly how I do it. But that's the goal. What happens is when I'm in a rush, like I was when I came back from that tour, then I was actually trying to practice in a very methodical way. I was taking it by specific sections and trying to bring each section up to tempo, trying to practice specific passages for a long time to make sure. And I'm not saying that doesn't work for most people. Just for me and the way I am, it doesn't work to force myself to just work too much. And again, I think it took a while for me to accept that, because what that means is that I don't want to be playing a lot of repertoire the same season, because it only creates more of that stress. And I'm completely amazed when I see people who are playing 4 different recital programs and 10 concertos the same year. That's just not me. I wish I were that way, but I'm just not. Whether it's because I don't work hard enough, I don't like working hard enough, or I just don't like practicing, or I just don't have the ability, I don't know. But, that's just my limitation, and I have to embrace it.
One of the questions that I often get from folks who, we're all busy, we have other things we need to do, or like you were describing on tour, things come up and you end up just not having the time that you anticipate having. If you only had 20 minutes to practice, what would you do with that time?
I would play things that I like. I certainly wouldn't spend my 20 minutes playing scales or doing any kind of exercise, because I would get no enjoyment out of it. For me, I think the main reason for me to do music is to enjoy what I do in a pretty sort of selfish way, if you will. I don't really do music because I want to do any specific things or playing in any specific places or have any kind of great recognition. Or, I mean, in the end, what I want to get from it is to enjoy what I do. So if I had 20 minutes to play, I would probably play whatever's in my fingers at the time that I like and that I feel like playing. If there's no stress, then all the better.